Good morning. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Josh. I'm going to be your presenter today. Welcome to everybody. Today's topic is handling sweep accounts in accounting. It's in accounting, of course, folks. That's where this is dealt with. That's where these accounts are worked with. But let's talk about sweep accounts. If some of you are attending this event today because you're unfamiliar with them, some of you may be attending because of that. Some of you may be attending because you have sweep accounts and you're a sweep account and you are trying to better handle or manage those. There might be more than one. There's usually two accounts involved in a sweep, of course. But for those of you who are unfamiliar with the sweep account concept, it's an asset account that automatically transfers typically an excess or surplus or deficit balance above a pre-designated or below pre-designated threshold from a main bank account into a typically high yield investment account, often a money market. Doesn't have to be. There are, different financial institutions offer different kinds of accounts in this nature. But if it's something you're interested in, you should contact your local financial institution and maybe ask the questions about that. So, like I said, an excess cash balance above a threshold or pre-designated amount is transferred or swept out of the main account, a checking account or something, savings account, into a high yield investment account or money market. Conversely, if the main account falls below the pre-designated set level, funds are swept from the investment or money market account back into the main account or primary account, as we call it, to ensure that expenses are covered. Okay. Typically, transfers between these or sweeps between these two asset accounts is generally or typically automatic. Okay. They're handy, and there's some definite benefits to having these types of accounts. Okay. I admit, folks, I don't deal with these a lot in my support calls over the course of 20 plus years of doing this. I've probably had half a dozen calls on dealing with the sweep accounts, but maybe we're getting this question coming in more and more from folks because they're becoming more popular. I don't know, but just texts were telling us that they were hearing about this from customers, and so we thought it would probably be best to talk about this. But benefits of sweep accounts are not restricted to, but can include idle cash that's sitting in low interest accounts can be moved into high interest accounts, okay, automatically. So rather than just sitting idle in something like a checking account where it's not earning any interest or little interest at all, it can be moved into a higher yield account where it does more work for you. That's benefit number one. Number two is it reduces the manual management, meaning maintaining consistent balances in the primary account removes the need for you to constantly be monitoring the account balance and the transfers, okay? And third benefit is improved cash flow management. Those are just three. There are others as well, likely, but those are what when I was researching this, was categorizing as the kind of the big three that I saw on that. And I'll talk about improved cash flow management here momentarily, because that's one of the things that really struck me about these as a real benefit to having a sweep account, in addition to, of course, earning more money from higher yield account. Okay. Like I said, the amount is not only just swept from one account into the other automatically, but it typically happens often, folks, like daily. Okay, like if at the end of the business day, the bank looks at that primary account. So if we go into, say, my Church Windows accounting, my primary account is my Huntington Bank checking right up here. Let me get out my highlighter right here. And my sweep account or investment account is the third one down, my Fifth Third money market account. Okay, those are my two accounts that I involve in the sweep. So by way of example, for mine, my church has said we want to maintain a consistent $10,000 in our Huntington Bank checking account to ensure that our expenses are covered, okay, for each day, or period, as the case may be. Okay, so but the daily aspect of it, folks, means it can be activity that you don't normally expect to see on the bank reconciliation. And that's kind of why we're really here to talk about it, okay? You really should ask your bank that if you are interested or have a sweep account or are considering getting some of these or setting up sweep accounts, is ask them how often those sweeps occur. They may not occur like on weekends because you're not posting too many transactions, but certainly on weekdays you could have a sweep transaction every day depending on the activity that occurs. In this case, in my Huntington Bank checking account. If I go to my balance tab here, I have swept and the balance has been swept in there, and I'm maintaining a $10,000 balance at the end of every month, except for the month of August, which is the month that we're currently in. Okay. But what we hear from folks most often is, since they're daily transactions, all of your bank, your checking account is having all the deposits being deposited and all the withdrawals coming out. And depending on how the activity is and those sweep accounts, you could be doing 2 or 3, couple dozen different asset transfers throughout the course of the month just to be able to reconcile with your checking account with your bank statement each month, right? If at the end of the day, the bank looks at whether that account, in this case, my Huntington Bank checking account, has more or less than $10,000 in it, they're going to basically take that money and move it back out over into my Fifth Third money market account, or they're going to pull money from my money market account over here, my Fifth Third money market, and they're going to move that into checking in order to top that off and get that balance back up to the daily 10,000 that I'm wanting it to be. So this can make the process of the bank reconciliation a little cumbersome. Okay, so you could be doing, like I said, maybe a dozen or 2 dozen transfers depending on how many sweep transactions occur during any given month. Okay, and that's what we hear on support is, do I really have to enter all of these transfers to and from the sweep accounts in order to be able to reconcile? And the simple answer is typically yes. Okay, if the purpose of the bank reconciliation is to ensure that Church Windows is representing, or all the activity that's occurring in my cash account is being properly recorded in my Church Windows software, I have to record those. The one exception is, if you don't want to, you probably could do one giant transaction at the end of the month, or one single transaction to get the account to reconcile at the end of the month if you wish, but I'm not going to do that way. Okay, I don't want to do that, because if an auditor is going to come in and talk to me about it, look at it, they're going to go, well, why are all these transactions here and why is this entry? I mean, I can't explain it, but considering how little and how fast I can actually post some transfers to get that to work, I'm going to go in and post those every day. Now, with that being said, okay, if we go back to the statement that I said before about control, okay, because of the challenges that come with the bank reconciliation process regarding sweep accounts, it offers you an opportunity to gain better control of the type of transactions that affect your primary account and how often those transactions appear or occur. Okay. Basically, it means, like I work with a lot of folks who post transactions to, say, contractors, okay, payments to contractors. Well, rather than going in and saying, okay, the contractor says, hey, when can I be paid? And then you go, oh, I'm going to pay them today. You say to the contractors, if you're going to do business with us, we have a payment schedule for payees or contractors that occurs on the 15th of each month and on the final business day of the month. Okay. If you're going to work with us, that's how we're going to do that. Or you do it on Monday of every week. Okay. And again, this is just one example of this. And this is what I mean by control. Okay. If I'm trying to minimize the number of transactions that occur in and out of my cash account on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, this is the type of control that we're talking about, okay? Is rather than going in, minimize, suggest or encourage contractors, payees, and employees to be paid electronically rather than with checks, right? That when an electronic transaction gets transferred to the bank, it is immediately hitting the bank. You're not waiting for that contractor, payee, or employee to decide when they want to take the check to the bank, deposit it, and then all of a sudden your bank shows it coming out, and then you're having to go in and do another sweep transaction because that account balance was changed that day. I think you're starting to get my point. Is in order to minimize the number of sweep transactions that actually truly affect the account on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, I want to control that. Okay. Have you set up a pay schedule for your employees that pays them on the 15th and the final business day of the month? If that's the last day of the month, great. But if it's the Friday before the final day of the month, that works too. Okay. The reason why I was talking about Mondays as an example of where we can minimize this activity in these sweep accounts, right? So I don't have to go in and post a bunch of transferred asset transfers between my money market account and my checking account is by if I say, okay, I'm going to pay my contractors on Monday electronically, but at the same time, I'm also depositing, say, that Sunday's offering into my checking account, I've got a whole bunch of activity that's occurring and clearing the bank on Monday and Tuesday. And then as things settle out throughout the week, maybe I don't have any other transactions where the account balance remains a consistent $10,000 for the, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all the way through till the following Monday again. See, so I'm only doing 6 or 8 sweep transfer transactions during the month as opposed to 20 or 25 or 30, 24 or whatever, depending on how often that asset account balance changes. So again, just things to think about, folks, when dealing with sweep accounts, because I don't have a bank statement here that shows a bunch of those transactions, okay? But again, we're seeing here that on my Huntington Bank checking account $10,000 balance, here it is, we're at the end of August. All right, if I'm assuming that my bank statement now shows this balance on here as a transfer, right? I've got to take 5,226.23 deficit balance and get that back up to the 10,000 again. I'm having to transfer $15,226.23 back from that money market account into my checking. Maybe you folks are familiar with your transfer transaction. I hope you are, because if you've got a sweep account, sweep accounts, you're going to become acutely familiar with your with those transfer transactions. And we do that by simply going up. I can do a journal entry. Okay, I could still do a debit to my main checking account to get that increased and a decrease or credit to my money market account for that, but there's a reason why I'm going to go to transfer, and it's up here under transactions in the top left and across the top center to transfer. So transactions right up here, everybody sees my arrow and then, or my circle, and then right here at the top, transfer right here, okay? This is the transaction that I'm going to be using exclusively for my sweep account transfers, okay? And then, as I was working through this, folks, I was like almost at the end of writing this document for myself up about talking about this. And I said, then it even becomes more challenging since we're dealing with a fund accounting system where if I've got funds on the bottom side of my balance sheet that offset or represent those two different asset accounts exactly. So instead of doing just asset transfers, I may be doing fund transfers at the very same time. So rather than doing 10 or 12 or 18 or 20 transfers in the month, I'm doubling that because I have to transfer the balance between my funds. 300 accounts, okay? So again, control to minimize the activity in those sweep accounts can really work to your benefit. And it goes back to that benefit of improved cash flow management, okay? Your accounts are being affected fewer days during the month or the year. And you're also reducing the amount of time you have to monitor or keep an eye on those accounts to ensure that they have the balances that you need or want. Okay, so if we go into transfer here, so in this case, I can do it as of today. My from account is going to be my money market, fifth third money market. Once I've chosen that asset, of course, it's going to force me to transfer to another asset. Again, another advantage of using the transfer as opposed to a journal entry, it forces me to choose like accounts, asset to asset or fund to fund in this case. There's my Huntington Bank checking. I'm now going to put in my $15,226.23. My payment method is, EFT. Comments would be something like, sweep activity, for today or for the month, whatever I decide, and I'm going to click Done, Add to Batch. Before I post, and folks who work with me on support calls are probably familiar with how I go about this, is where possible, I go right up here to the upper right, and I use the Show Running Balance button up here, folks, right there, okay? Hopefully everybody can see my poorly drawn circle and arrow up there that shows the Show Running Balance screen, all right? Or the button, excuse me, button. So when I click on that, now I've added the batch, it now shows me the actual effect of the transaction that I had, that this transfer will have on both of these accounts before I ever post it. So shows the Huntington Bank checking starts out with a deficit of $52,26.23. Transaction effect is adding in the $15,226.23, and my adjusted balance for the Huntington checking is now back to $10,000 the way that I want. And my Fifth Third money market now is down to my $250,000 with earnings of $330.86 at this point, okay? So this transaction is doing exactly what I want it to do. And so what I can now, if it didn't, I would just go back up and move it back up to the top, make the changes to it, done, add to batch, checking the show running balance window to ensure that all accounts are being affected correctly. Knowing that it is now, I can safely post this transaction, okay? And I'm not going to print it. But again, when I go back and close out and go back to my manage accounts and in my chart of accounts here to my Huntington account and go to the tree view or balance tab, there it is. As of today through the rest of the year until I do another transfer or transactions affect that account, my Huntington Bank checking now shows the $10,000 daily balance that I'm wanting. So, you know, folks, again, what I talk about is you could go, I mean, I didn't really talk about this, but rather than waiting for the bank statement, if you check the account every day, you could go in and do a transfer every day and get ahead of it if you want to, right? You log into the account, the accounts involved, check and see if there was any sweep activity that day. If there was, or for the previous day, if there was, go simply into accounting, post the transfer, and then take care of it. The transfers, of course, will reconcile on both accounts perfectly. Okay, so it'll reconcile as a deposit from on the one account and a withdrawal from the other. So I might have transfers on both the deposit side of my bank reconciliation and the withdrawal side, depending on whether that primary account had more or less money in it to end the day on any given day. Okay, so see what I mean? That's what I mean about what makes sweep accounts challenging is always the bank rec, and that's why I was really kind of trying to drive home the idea of maintaining control of the activity of your accounts in the manners that you have control over. You know, like I said, rather than writing checks to contractors every day when they come in demanding it, you let them know doing business with us gets you paid on either the middle of the month or on the last day of the month, or, you know, again, encouraging your employees to take on, or your contractors to take on, more electronic payments so the cash account is affected immediately, and then you decide when that's occurring at the bank. Again, Mondays occur as really good days or early parts of the week, so you try to minimize the activity later on. Of course, there's always going to be exceptions to that, right? Because you've got an emergency that you have to pay for, so something may happen. But I'm going to try to make sure that for audit purposes, I'm only doing maybe 6 or 8 or 10 different asset transfers to maintain these sweep account activity and balances, rather than virtually one every day, you know, which is what can occur if you don't implement those controls. And then you're having to, you know, maintain and keep an eye on the account more often, as opposed to knowing, oh, okay, I know nothing's happening in there. And then, you know, occasionally you might be surprised by something that shows up when you didn't expect it. But, you know, when do you schedule those electronic payments for things like utilities? You know, you pay them early, fine. Just don't pay it late, right? So anyway, all right, folks, that is where I'm going to leave it for today. Well, am I maybe, you know what? Let me touch on one other thing before I wrap things up. Folks, go ahead and enter questions in the Q&A portion of the control panel there. Prepare those if you want for me. What I didn't just show or neglected to show was at the transfer window, right? If I wait till the end of the month and I get my statement to do those transfers, as long as they occur on different dates, I can post as many transfers, put as many transfers in the batch as I want below, right? So if I have 10 different transfers on my bank statement, some going to the primary account, some coming out, I can still add those all to the one single batch and only post them at the bottom right when I'm done, right? Unposted transfers batch 0. As I add transfers to that number, that increases or shows a number. But I can do that at the end of the month and do them all at one time if I want. That's your choice. That certainly might make the process easier for you too. But again, I'm in favor of doing less, so 5 or 10 or 8 or whatever, rather than, 15 or 20 or 25. So just a thought, just wanted to show you that you can do multiple transfers at the same screen at the same time for different dates. So.